Hi, good day to you all. I am Anil from nextpm.in. We deliver sessions or lectures in project management, program management, and portfolio management. I am a civil engineer with 22 years of professional experience, and I have acquired PMP credential as well as PGMP credential. Currently, I am pursuing my PFMP. So far, in the previous sessions about the process groups, we have seen the first among five, that is the initiating process group. Initiating is defining the project goal and determining the reasons for the project. Okay, so it is determining the reasons for the project, and there we have seen that the team agrees on the reasons and need for work. Then as a team they craft a clear statement of purpose with anticipated deliverables, and through different deliberations and discussions, management finally approves the project by approving the project charter. It is then when the project moves to the planning process group. Okay, or we can put it this way, that an approved project charter is the prerequisite for planning. So planning is determining the course of action for the project. We have seen initiating is determining the reasons for the project. Now once the reasons are finalized and agreed, approved, then we should determine the course of action for the project. So for that purpose, the planning team works on two main documents. Of course, there are other ancillary documents, but there are two main documents. So one is, or the first one is, a project scope statement. Okay, and then from then a project plan. So what is creating a project scope statement and what is developing a project plan? A project scope statement builds upon and clarifies the information in the project charter. We have seen that in the project charter, many answers or answers to many of the questions like who, how, when, okay, those things will be answered or listed. So the project scope statement builds upon and clarifies the information in the project charter. And the project plan, the second of the document, lists all the work that needs to be completed. Once the planning is done, then we should have the list of the works, what should be done, how should be done, like the schedule or timeline for completing the work, the resources and the available budget and things like that. So there are two main documents which we will deal in the planning process group. And understand, without careful planning, a project manager and the project team may find it difficult, if not impossible, to achieve the project success. So we are employing project management, and then we are engaging the project manager, the team, everything to achieve project success. So without careful planning, everything will be in vain. Okay, now we completed the project planning process group and moved to executing process group. Okay, just assume. But there may be instances where a new requirement or a new issue will be encountered. So that happens everywhere. So this could impact the works be performed, and it could impact the planning, it could impact the timeline. So even with best planning, some project plan rework may be required. So that doesn't mean that we should not be planning. So we should be ready to accept that change or the rework. We will now, through the next slides and sessions, explore first about creating a project scope statement, then about developing a project plan, and finally about creating individual plans to address project risk, quality, communication, and procurement. We will see the next slide. So what is project scope? Project scope is the work that will, and pay attention, or will not be done Okay, that will be or will not be done to create the unique product, service, or result. We have seen that project means it is creating a unique product, service, or result. It has a definitive start, end, and things like that. So here with the scope, we should be understanding what should be done and what should not be done. So just like how important is knowing what to do, it is equally important to know what not to do as part of the project, because we should not be allowing scope creep. Writing or drafting the scope statement is the primary action taken in the planning process, because scope decides everything. It can affect the budget, that we will see in the next slides. Okay, we have seen that the project charter created during the initiating phase began to define the project or determine the reason for the project. Okay, that is done in initiating. Now in the planning process group, the scope statement which we develop clarifies and expands upon the project charter's description, that is project description, reason or justification for the project and its requirements. So it is like elaborating on the project charter. And always it is a joint effort, we know that. Okay, so creating the scope statement is a joint effort between the project stakeholders and the team. They start by reviewing and updating the information in the project charter, because they always have a document to refer to which is approved by the management and through which the project is given a go ahead. So project charter is being referred and they start reviewing and updating the information as part of developing or creating a project scope statement. They also make sure that they have agreed upon the requirements and confirm the finished product, service, or result. Okay, so there will be different or varying requirements, expectations, but there should be a reasonable good understanding of what is going to be delivered and what is not going to be, just like in the scope. So when we create a project scope statement in planning, there are other additional information which is included over and above what is being discussed now, as well as the project charter. Just like the project constraints will be clarified or it will be elaborated in detail. So the constraints are the limiting factors, and then assumptions will be included. Assumptions are factors about the project that we consider true without getting proof. Assumptions will be verified whether they hold good or not during the course of the project, but as of now, with the information available now, they are taken as factors or facts. Then the boundaries, that is just like the scope, what is included and what is not included in the project. And finally, the acceptance, the user acceptance criteria, the conditions that must be met before the deliverables are accepted, like what it should be, what should be the performance, what should be the finish, and things like that. Okay, so during the planning discussions, different expectations may arise or different requirements may arise. Okay, and that make necessary to redefine the project deliverables and sometimes the schedule and budget. If the requirement is more, of course the time required as well as the funds required will be changing according to that, and we have seen that project constraints will be detailed here. Okay, and as mentioned, always, even in the initiating also, an open communication channel between the project stakeholders, that is the people who have an interest in the project, and the project team is essential everywhere, even in planning. Okay, next we will understand what is the relevance of project scope statement in the next slides. The scope statement is an important document because it defines the project parameters like the constraints, assumptions, the boundaries, what is included, what is not included, and it establishes the baseline for measuring success. Because when we know the scope, okay, and what are the limitations and what were assumed, once we are through the project, like in monitoring and controlling, as well as when we finally are about to close, we need to measure the success. Okay, and that is measured against the project scope statement, and thereby it is a baseline for measuring the success. It is the basis for all future project decision making. When there is a change, or when someone asks or requests, or a stakeholder requests for a change in the project scope. So this is the document or reference document, okay? And it is the document we have seen that the final deliverable or the project outcome is compared for acceptance, because this is the baseline, okay? And it assists with creating a common understanding of project expectations among the project stakeholders. We have seen in the stakeholders, like there are different stakeholders, some are key, some are not much bothered, but most of them will have an interest. It can be negative, it can be positive. So through the project statement, we agree upon or arrive upon a common understanding of the project expectations. That is, there should be a clear consensus or common understanding which is established through the project statement or project scope statement, to be very specific, okay? For a project to be successful, it must meet or exceed expectations that are outlined in the scope statement. That's the baseline document. The scope statement is used as the starting point when planning all the work, because once we know what is to be done and what not to be done, we can plan further. Once that is firmed up or once that is agreed upon and signed off, it can be used as a starting point for all the planning work that needs to be completed, like creating the schedule, determining the budget, determining what resources in terms of manpower, then equipments and things. Everything can be decided upon from the project scope statement, and that is why it is called as a starting point for all planning work, okay? And in the next slides, we will go through the necessity of understanding the constraints, the level or extent of project constraints, because we have seen that a change in the scope or a change in the quality, okay, or change in the allowing budget, that can have an impact on other factors. So we will see the constraints in detail or how it is going to be affected. So wait for that. Understanding the level of restrictions or control on a project constraint is critical to its success. Why? So we can understand, or we will understand this more with the help of a diagram where the relationship between the constraints like scope, time, cost and quality are represented. They are represented, as you can see in the figure, as three sides of a triangle. From our simple logic, we can conclude that if one side of this triangle becomes larger or smaller, at least one other side will need to adjust to compensate for that, to accommodate this change. So they are all interrelated as three sides of a triangle. So a change in scope will have a change in the time, or it will have a change in the cost and quality, okay? So if the scope is increased, the budget may also need to be increased to meet the new expectations in the scope of work. So things like that. So most project will have these restrictions, because we can't have endless fund flow, we can't have endless resources, or we can't say that we need a standard which is not at all practical within a certain amount of fund, okay, and time should be within a particular limit, okay? So most projects have restrictions to one or all of these constraints, okay, and that could impact the project success. So it is very important that when starting a project, we have to, as a team, as a project manager or a project management team, you have to find out what is your deadline. Is there any restriction? Is there a strict deadline? Or do you have a limited funding? Or if the quality of your outcome is critical, okay? So it is very important, because a restriction or change in one of the constraints can impact another. We have seen as three sides of a triangle, okay? So in order to be successful as a project manager or successful as a project team, we should always understand and keep in mind the relationship and interdependence between the constraints, and act or perform accordingly as we plan and work on the project further, okay? So constraints, very important. Pay attention to understand what is being limited, what is not being limited, and accordingly plan, okay? We'll next explore about developing a project plan. I had earlier mentioned in the session that a project scope is the work that will or will not be done to create the unique product, service, or result. Now, once the project scope statement is clear, okay, the project manager and the team can further plan or advance in the planning process group by determining the task to achieve the scope, okay, by determining the schedule, okay, by identifying and assigning resources such as team members, equipment, and facilities, and by creating or understanding the budget. So, in determining the task, we need to understand the sequencing of the task, that is listing the task in order how they should be performed, because there is a logical order in which any particular task can be performed. Like we have to have the foundation before we have the walls, or we have to have the columns if it is a building, okay, before we have the slab, or when we plan a vacation, okay, we need to have the tickets or the venue reserved before we actually start moving to that particular venue, things like that. And in determining the task, we need to have a work breakdown structure. We'll see what a work breakdown structure is in detail, okay, in the next slides. Then in the schedule, okay, we need to have the start and completion time for each task, and finally, as a whole, the project completion date, okay. So a project plan covers almost everything or list everything with respect to the project, like the work needed to be completed, the schedule or the timeline, the resources required, and the budget, okay. And we will understand about work breakdown structure or WBS in the next slide. Okay, what is a WBS or a work breakdown structure? It is a hierarchical breakdown of all the work that needs to occur to create the product, service, or result. Okay, it is a hierarchical breakdown, that is in the order how it is being done. Okay, and it is a breakdown of the task. We have seen in the previous slides that once a project scope statement is completed or agreed upon, the project manager and the team members start defining the necessary work while developing the project plan. Okay, how it can be done, how the work can be done, or how the scope can be met with. So this is done by creating a work breakdown structure. Okay, WBS organize, define, and track the progress of project task. It is a list or it is a hierarchical breakdown of all the tasks. So it can be used to organize, it can be used to define, and it can be used to track the progress of project task. Okay, you can consider it as a checklist, okay, or it can be in an Excel sheet, okay, that can be in a or just a paper drawn one, okay, where all the works that need to be completed is listed. Okay, to create a WBS, the project manager and the project team members start by identifying and listing all the deliverables and tasks that need to be completed. What all are the requirements or what all should be done to meet the scope. Okay, and when the project team feels or agree in between them that they listed almost every deliverable and task, they will then start to sort or sequence the list into the order of performance. We have seen it is a breakdown as well as it is a hierarchical breakdown. Okay, so ordering or sequencing is very important. So identify and list all the deliverables and tasks and then arrange them or sort them in the sequence of order of performance. Okay, you know that, like as I mentioned, like foundation has to happen before the columns or before the walls. Okay, and just like before we start installing a computer network, we need to have the procurement done, or at least start with the basic procurement and things like that. That is, some tasks will need to occur before the start or completion of other tasks, while other tasks can start at the same time, because there are some which can overlap and some which cannot, or some which should be finished before other tasks are started. We'll see most of them in the scheduling or when we deal with the critical path. So, the easiest way to determine all the work that will be needed to be done is to identify each project deliverable, and we should check or we should ask what tasks need to be completed to achieve this deliverable, and what should be the order of these tasks so that we can achieve this deliverable. So that makes our life easy. That is a practical way of how we can develop a WBS. Okay, and in the next slides we look into the schedule, then how we can assign resources, and how a rough estimate or budget is being prepared. Okay, see, now we have the scope or the scope statement, then we have the WBS, that is the hierarchical list of the tasks to be performed to achieve the deliverable. Now we should understand or determine the time required to complete each of these tasks. Okay, that is like we should have a start date as well as end date. Okay, because the project should have a definite start and definite ending. Okay, so we should, just as I mentioned in the WBS, we should be asking simple questions like, okay, when should each task and deliverable be completed? Like, is there any restriction in the time? Okay, is it tied to any other task? Okay, particular task tied to any other thing? Okay, just like we have seen in the WBS. And who is responsible for each deliverable and task? Like, we should assign a person who is responsible for its deliverable. Okay, and we should make sure that whether it is realistic, okay, whether the time frame we have estimated is realistic. That we can do by discussing with team who has done it previously, or referring to the knowledge base of the organization. Okay, and as and when the schedule is determined, we will start, or the team will start including or assigning resources and team members for each of the work. Okay, who should be doing what, like we have seen the roles and responsibilities. Okay, the project manager and the project team members who are assigned to the project, okay, they should manage their time carefully to ensure that the project tasks are completed on time, because it is a constraint. If we exceed on the time which was budgeted, we will exceed on the spending or the fund, or maybe we will end up on like if we are trying to reduce the time, okay, we will end up on compromising the quality or scope. Okay, and most of the time, okay, it is common that always the time requirement is underestimated, or we are too much enthusiastic to confirm that, okay, we will finish the project within a certain amount of time. Okay, so that is a common error, or it is a risk. So as I mentioned earlier, we should be gathering realistic estimate from team members who are having experience and who are assigned to the task. Okay, and to help create an accurate estimate, okay, both in terms of time and cost. Okay, we should be taking their advice, and just like the changes or the rework in planning, even the schedule will be updated as and when more detailed information is available. So in order to begin, we should have a basic schedule, we should have resources assigned, we should have a budget estimate with which we can further plan and then proceed to the execution. We will see more details in the next slides. As I was told earlier, the project plan is a combination of the work, the schedule, and assigned resources, like resources in terms of fund or budget, the human resources, equipment. Okay, that is the project plan. Okay, and most of the time, to make sure that, okay, we have not left out anything, the project manager uses a software or a productivity tool or a simple list which is created out of Microsoft Excel or a simple Word document, and that lay out the project's necessary work, timeline, and resources. So it is important to have a list of all these things so that nothing is left out. However, we have had a schedule, okay, but still there is something which is very important, that is establishing the critical path, because the critical path decides or determines the earliest possible date in which a project can be completed. And once the critical path is established or it is known, the duration estimates and the expected start date and expected end date for each task need to be modified. Okay, though we have had a basic schedule or organization or hierarchical list of works in the WBS, okay, we need to establish the critical path of that schedule. Then we can have a finalization of the project plan. We'll elaborate on the critical path in the next slide. Critical path is the sequence of tasks that requires the longest duration to complete. Okay, and the speciality is that there is no extra time or slack or float between the activities in the critical path. Okay, so that is where I mentioned it is the minimum length of time required to complete the project. There is nothing left to have a slack or a float. Okay, and they activities in the critical path are to be performed sequentially. Okay, nothing can happen parallel, that is one task being completed before the next task can begin. That is, the tasks that make up the critical path do not overlap. Okay, and if the time taken on the task which is part of the critical path, okay, somehow we manage to make it longer or shorter than expected, it can have a direct influence or impact on the timeline of the entire project, because that is the shortest possible or the minimum length of the time required to complete the project. So any change, any extension or any shortening of that critical path duration can impact the timeline of the project. Okay, and the critical path methodology provides information about the amount of time, okay, that we have seen that once the critical path is established, we can reaffirm or confirm the schedule of the project. So it is a important thing. Okay, all these which I have mentioned, like critical path, these are all having in-depth subject content which are to be dealt with in separate sessions. Once I am through the next process groups like executing, then like our closing, monitoring and controlling, we will deal with each of these items in separate sessions so that you can have more information. Okay, and in the next slides we will summarize the essentials of developing the project plan and we will move to other project planning. Okay, because we have discussed lots of information in developing the project plan, the contents of this slide can be used as a checklist while you prepare a plan or a project plan for your project. Okay, we have seen or we understood that the combination of the work, schedule and assigned resources is the project plan. So let us understand what all should be there or the essentials of developing a project plan. So in developing the project plan, we have to include each deliverable and associated task. We have seen what is to be done to achieve a particular deliverable. Okay, and in the WBS we have seen the task in order of performance. Okay, and the deliverable or task should be identified by a name. Okay, and in the schedule, duration for each task, that is anticipated amount of time required to complete the task. It can be in hours, days or weeks as appropriate for the project. Okay, and from then we can understand or we can reduce the start and end date or expected start and end date for each task. Then we can arrive upon the project completion date as a whole. Then who is the individual responsible for each deliverable or task, or are they doing multiple tasking, or are there more people to a particular task depending upon the complexity. Okay, and is there any special mentioning about notes or comments that will help the project team who is going to execute, because we will be planning with certain assumptions. Okay, or having certain restrictions on the constraints. So this thing should be properly communicated or transferred to the team who is executing. So notes or comments that might help the team. So these are the essentials. You can use this as a checklist while you prepare your project plan. Okay. And now we have a fairly good knowledge of planning process group, then its stages, that is first creating a project statement, then developing a project plan including the WBS, the critical path and other things. Okay, so through the next slides I will guide you through how to create individual plans to address the project quality, communication, risk and procurement, and that will end the project planning process group and we will move to the next process group, execution. So before that we will go through the project quality plan, project communication plan, risk, then procurement plan. Project quality. So we have seen the stakeholders and even the sponsor have expectations about the project deliverable. So we should have a clear understanding, or it is critical to consider the quality of work being performed so that the quality of the final deliverable is meeting the expectation, or ensure that they live up to the stakeholders expectations and standards. Okay, and if the quality is compromised, the project is unsuccessful or it will not meet the criteria or acceptance criteria. Okay, an important part of project quality is defining the process that verify and validate. Okay, it is defining the process that is used to verify and validate that the project deliverables will meet the expectations of the stakeholders. Okay, the processes are to be identified, verified and validated, and these processes are built into the project plan so that they are being followed or taken care while the execution is being done. One such is quality review. Okay, quality reviews need to be performed on a regular basis. The frequency should be done, or who will be reviewing the quality, whether it is a hold point and things like that. Okay, but everything will be done only upon receiving the stakeholders agreement of the criteria. Okay, because we are all interested or focused on making the project success. So the quality review or the level and the frequency of the review should be producing a deliverable which is going to be accepted or within the acceptance criteria of the stakeholder. So defining and agreeing upon a measurement criteria is an important part of developing the project quality plan and thereby the scope statement. Okay, because if the cost of quality is high, thereby the budget will be more, or we might end up having a longer schedule and things like that. Okay, we can, just like in the previous plans I mentioned, a simple checklist is a very effective method to verify that the work performed meets the agreed upon standards. The project quality is very important because it is within which the stakeholders expectations and standards are measured. So the project should be delivering the deliverable in such a quality. Okay, and in the next slide we will understand more about the next one, that is the project communications plan. Throughout this session I have mentioned the importance of communication, because project management, most of the time the project manager does the communication, because it is exchange of information so that the right information is available in the right manner to the right person, so that the decisions can be made or actions can be taken. So communication is very critical to the successful completion of the project. Okay, it is very critical. It is important for the project manager and the project team as well as the stakeholders to understand why a communication will occur and how will it occur, or what is the reason and how it is being managed throughout the project. So a communication plan should answer what, when, who, where and how. Most of the time these are simple questions, but thinking upon them even during planning will make our life easy when we execute it and make the project a success. So what need to be communicated, whether it is the status report or is it a project plan. Okay, and when does or how frequently this information needs to be distributed. Okay, who should receive the information. Not everyone require all the information, because then they will be overloaded with information and will ignore certain important thing. So who should receive the information is very important. Okay, and how this information is being distributed, where is it stored later or archived for later reference, that is important. Just like filing cabinet, notebooks, computers, websites, or is it displayed anywhere? Okay, so how is this information distributed and stored, in what format? Okay, whether it is through a meeting, or is it through a memo, email, phone messages, or as I mentioned, just like a display, most of the time in a safety slogan, or the project progress. Okay, things like that. So communication is important, so that information is being passed through and the decisions are made, people are made aware of the project progress. Just like any other stakeholder, everyone should be informed. So it is a critical activity. Okay, in the next slide we will understand more about risk or project risk plan. So what is a risk? Okay, it is something, in simpler terms, it is something which we have not expected or considered previously. Okay, so it is possible unexpected event or conditions that might impact the successful outcome of the project. So that is critical. Okay, so it is very important to identify and understand a possible unexpected event so that we can plan for it. Okay, identifying potential risk provide the opportunity to plan actions in case that occur, that will help to avoid a potential negative project outcome or even a project failure. Like if in case a particular material or a particular equipment is not available on the time we require, we should have a plan B. Okay, or if a person needs to go on emergency, there should be a backup plan. Okay, they are simple risk. Okay, and such things should be thought of. Okay, and there should be a action, okay, backup plan for it. So if there is a risk, we should have a backup plan. The team members and the project stakeholders should brainstorm and continuously communicate to identify and document the possible risk and how those risks will be addressed. As I told you, each of this plan is having subject matter which is enough to cover a session 1 or 2 hours. Okay, the risk, first we will have a risk register, then we will have the plans to address it, and if it fails there will be a plan B, things like that we will deal later. Okay, but just this session will give you a knowledge or an introduction that there is risk and we should plan for it. Okay, the team, the project team as well as the project manager should work together to reduce or at least eliminate, if not possible reduce it. Okay, and we can enhance on the positive risk. Okay, the negative risk we should try to eliminate it or at least reduce the risk occurrence. Okay, so here again we can have a checklist to make sure that okay, we have done these steps so that the risk will not affect us, or if there is a risk we should be taking or triggering an action as a counter action for the project risk. Okay, and in the next slide we will understand about the procurement plan, that is the last of the planning. Okay, procurement. See, most of the organizations, even the organization in which you or we all are working, will have a defined procedure of how to procure or acquire products and services which we are not familiar with. Okay, and when we club the risk and the project procurement, we can say that it is like a way of transferring risk to a specialist organization. Okay, procurement. So if there is a procurement plan or a procurement procedure for your organization, try to understand that. Okay, and follow it. If it is not there, or if for some reasons for a particular item there is no agreed upon detailed procedure, we should first understand it, document it. Okay, then formalize it and include it in the planning process, because it is required while we go for the execution. Okay, So if you need to develop a procedure for procurement, okay, and at least include these things, okay, which I am mentioning. Again, use this as a checklist. Understand the reasons and requirement for procuring any product or service. Like, are we not specialists so that we can't do that particular task or activity, or we'll have a better team, or we will be able to transfer the risk. So what is the reason and requirement for procuring any product, okay, and how we are soliciting the bids, like what is the process for getting bids, okay, how we are getting a proposal, and once the proposals are in, how we are negotiating the terms, like what is included, what is not included, okay, what all they should be pricing for. So negotiating the terms with the vendor or supplier, okay, and then before signing an agreement or a contract, we should have a legal expert reviewing that, okay, because it is a contractually binding agreement, okay. So a legal expert should review that, and while we execute that agreement or contract, there is payment, okay. So there should be a billing and payment method, okay, which should be communicated and agreed between both the parties, okay, whether it is a monthly billing or is there any 60-day cycle payment method, things like that, okay. And ensuring that the party or the party from which we are procuring the product or services are aware of the schedule and quality requirements, okay. Whatever that they are supplying should meet a particular moment of time, or it should meet a particular quality, okay. This should be made clear to them and understood, and they should be signing on the agreement, okay. Then only we can have a proper system in place, and we can make sure that the project is a success. We'll summarize what all we have learned in the planning process group in the next slide, and we'll move to the next process group. So far, we have seen in the planning process group about creating the scope statement, developing a project plan by creating the WBS, then work schedule or time frame, then assigning resources, creating a budget estimate, okay, then creating individual plans to address the project quality, communication, risk, procurement, and as I told you, they are all having that much subject depth which are to be covered in individual sessions, but this is just to provide you an introductory knowledge, okay. So if we quickly summarize our planning, okay, with a scope agreed upon through the scope statement, that is the first document which we prepare. Then we prepare the project plan which will clarify the schedule and other planning activities, okay. Once these are done, we will move to the next process group, that is executing. Having said that, okay, revisiting and modifying or revising the project plan is common, because when we actually move to the execution, some additional deliverable or task might be required to meet a particular requirement, to meet a particular time allocated, or we found that, okay, we have underestimated a particular task, okay, or some risk has happened. So the project plan which we have developed in the planning process group might require modification, but we will do it with due deliberations and proper review, okay. And in the next sessions, we will go through the next process groups like executing, then monitoring and controlling, finally closing. Till that time, okay, take care, and I wish you all a happy learning experience. Bye bye.